You seem to have things well in hand, he said. How soon can you give us some tangible results? We've just started housekeeping. In a year, maybe 2, we'll have an idea where to begin a concentrated search for what you want to know. The general shook his head slowly, his eyes remaining on Paul's face. You aren't going to have anything like a year. You haven't got time to run down one line of research and then another. Run them all at once, 1,000 of them if you want to. Why do you think you've got the budget you have? Some things, said Paul, like threading a needle or analyzing a human being, don't go much faster when 1,000 men work at it than when there's only one. They do when there are 1,000 needles to thread or brains to pick. And that's what we're up against here. We need a volume of the kind of men we've been talking about, and we need them quick. We have to find out how to get the first one, and you haven't got as much time now as we thought you had when Superman began. They're trying to close us up. We hadn't planned to build another wheel right away, not until some refinements of design had been worked out, and we had some results from Superman now. All that's been scrapped. We've received orders from Washington that erection of a second wheel is to begin at once, using the plans of the first one. Fabrication of structures is already underway. I don't understand, said Paul. If we don't get another one up there within a matter of weeks, this hysterical opposition among the public is liable to prevent us ever getting one there again. We have to act while we still have authority, before the crackpots persuade Congress to take it away. And by the time it's built, I want some men to put in it. Men who can be trusted to not jeopardize it the moment they put their clumsy feet aboard. I want them. Medic and I intend to have them. That's by way of an order. The general rose, but Paul remained seated. You can't get them that way, and you know it, the latter said. We'll do all we can, as I've told you before. I think you'll do considerably more now. That was quite a talk you delivered to your boys a couple of weeks ago. We will ostensibly work at the task of developing an airless man, is the way I believe you put it. You're going to do a lot more than ostensibly work at it, medic. Just how much do you think you can get away with? Paul remained motionless in the chair. Only his lips moved. So you had a report on our little meeting. I hope it was complete enough to give you the rest of the things I said, that my basic purpose was not to produce human robots, but to validate the humanity of man. Oglethorpe leaned closer, his fists resting on the top of the desk. The humanity of man be damned. I told you before we want men who've forgotten they were ever human, men of metal and electrons. If I didn't think you were the man who could do it, probably the only man in the whole country, you wouldn't last here another minute. But you can do it, and you're going to. Your little lecture was enough to ruin your career in any place you try to run to if you undermine Superman. Who do you suppose would trust you with any kind of research after that expression of intent to sabotage the project your government entrusted you with and which you agreed to carry out? You're finished, medic. Washed up completely in your own profession. Unless you give me what I've asked for, I won't take promises anymore. The only assurance you can give me from here on out is results. I want those men, and I want them damn fast. Professor Barker listened attentively as Paul sat across from him in the administration office and reported Oglethorpe's visit and demands. We're caught in a squeeze, and we've got to push both ways, Paul said. If the base goes down, Superman goes with it, and we've lost an opportunity that will never come again in our lifetimes. So we've got to do 2 things. We've got to give active support to the rebuilding of the wheel, and we've got to develop some kind of show that will convince Oglethorpe that Superman is giving him what he wants. It will mean detouring our basic objectives, but it's necessary in order to have a project at all. I'd like you to take charge of it. It'll be a waste of time. Barker said slowly. I wonder if we'll ever get back on the track. We'll have to gamble on it, said Paul. I don't want you to feel I'm deliberately pushing you up a blind alley, but I think you're the best man for bringing up something we can sell. Oglethorpe. While we try to do some real research on some honest goals, we can follow the usual lines of so-called training. Brute conditioning through shock and fear and pain and discomfort. Most of the men here are already well anesthetized in that respect. Their breakdown level is high, Cummins was the highest, said Paul, and he cracked. But work along those lines anyway. Maybe we can find a way to thicken the conditioning armor. At the same time, let's push a genuine investigation into the nature of error as hard as we can. For the moment, we'll forget broader objectives until we know the project is safe. Barker agreed reluctantly, feeling that they would end up as mere personnel counselors before long. As soon as he left, Paul called Oglethorpe. "I've got a suggestion," he said. "Let's not get on the defensive about this thing. Why don't you propose a senatorial investigation of Space Command? Are you crazy? Why would we want to have them come out here and pick our bones to pieces before making final burial? We've got a story to tell them. Remember? We've got Superman. That's going to produce for the first time in the world's history a man adequate to go into the dangers of space. And there's that little story of yours about courage. I think that would go over with them. We'd be out in front if we took the initiative in this, instead of just waiting until it rolled over us." There was a long pause before Oglethorpe spoke again. "I wonder just what you're trying to do," he said finally. "I know you don't mean a word of what you're saying at all, but I do mean it," Paul said earnestly. "I want Superman saved. You want the wheel. It amounts to the same thing. You could be right. You might even be telling the truth. I'll give it some thought." The officer in charge of the rocket crews and the takeoff stand was a young engineer soldier named Harper. Paul had met him during the first week at base. His endorsement of Project Superman was enthusiastic. After talking with Oglethorpe, Paul took a jeep over to the stand and located Harper. The engineer was overseeing the fueling process on a big rocket. "Doc Medic," Harper exclaimed. "How's your crew of head shrinkers coming along? We're just about ready for your new breed of pilots." "What do you mean?" "This is the Nucleus ship. She's going out in orbit tonight with the first batch of supplies and instruments to get ready for the new wheel. We're going to need your men awfully fast." "That's what I came to talk about. Can you spare a few minutes?" "Sure." Harper led him to the office, where the whining of fueling pumps was silenced. "What can we do for you?" "I wanted to ask about Cummins. You knew him pretty well, didn't you?" "Buddies, just like that." Harper crossed his fingers. "What went wrong, do you think? I know it's all been hashed over in the investigations, but I'd like your personal feelings about him." Harper's face sobered, and he looked away a moment. "Cummins was as good a guy as they come," he said. "But in a pinch, he was just a weak sister. That doesn't mean he didn't have a lot on the ball," Harper added defensively. "He was a better pilot than most of us ever will be, but he was just human like the rest of us." "What do you mean, human? Weak, soft, failure when the going gets rough. Everything we have to be on guard against every minute we're alive. I take it you don't think much of human beings as such." Harper leaned forward earnestly. "Listen, Doc, when you've been around ships as long as I have, you'll know what Captain West really meant. The weakest link in any technological development has always been the men involved with its operation. In spaceflight, our weakness is pilots and technicians. Set a machine on course, and it'll go until it breaks down, and flash you a warning before it fails. With a man, you never know when he's going to fail, and you have to be on guard against his breakdown every minute because he won't give any warning. Think what it's like to be in our shoes. We take the controls of a few $100 million worth of machinery, and we know that every last man of us is booby-trapped with some weakness that can break out in a critical moment and destroy everything. We fight against it. We struggle to hold it in and act like responsible instruments, and we grow to hate ourselves because of the weak things that we are. Cummins was like that. He fought himself every waking hour, knowing that he had a weakness of becoming confused in a tight spot. Oh, it was nothing that even showed up on the tests, and he was the best man of any of us on the base. But he knew it was there, just as we all know our closets bulge with skeletons that we try to keep from breaking out. "Do you fight yourself the way Cummins did?" Paul asked. "Sure. What would happen if you pulled a blunder that wrecked that ship out there on the stand?" "I'd have had it, that's all. I'd never get within 10 miles of a rocket base again as long as I lived. And there wouldn't be much worth living for. It would be pretty wonderful to feel you weren't constantly on the verge of some disastrous blunder, wouldn't it? It would be a rocket man's idea of heaven to handle these ships with that kind of a feeling inside him. We're about ready to begin running tests on Superman, and I'd like you to be the first to help us out. Can you arrange it? We're tied up like a ball of string on getting the nucleus ship in orbit. I know Oglethorpe gave orders we were to jump when you called, but I'll have to check on replacements for those of us you take. What kind of test are you going to run on me? I want to find out how long it takes you to make a serious error, and what happens to you when you do. Arrangements were made for initiating this series of tests 2 days later. Paul had designed them, and Nat Holt's crew had built the equipment. But before they were started, Paul grew increasingly aware of the clamor and public agitation against the wheel. Instead of dying out after a small spurt of anger, it was accumulating momentum in every corner of the nation. A rabble-rouser named Morgan in the Middle West had proposed a motor caravan to Space Command Base, where the participants would go on a sit-down strike until assurance was given that no wheel would be built again. And on the heels of this came the demand by an increasing number of senators for a full investigation of the base. Paul met Barker after seeing the newscast of Morgan's revivalist-type appeal for a caravan of protest against the base. "This looks like it could get to be something that would be hard to handle," Barker said. "It doesn't seem reasonable that the near crash of the first wheel at San Francisco could be responsible for all this commotion." "I don't think it is," Paul answered reflectively. "The sinking of a big ocean liner doesn't produce hysterical demands that no more ships be built. The crash of an airship with 100 people aboard is accepted for what it is, without this kind of reaction. I think these broadcasts and write-ups of Captain West's appeal have sunk in deeper than Oglethorpe or anyone else ever intended.